Hello and welcome to Endurance Minded. It's the podcast that looks at the psychological and emotional components of endurance sports and how they impact performance. I'm your host, Taylor Thomas, founder and coach at TEC. And on this episode, I welcome back to the show Christine Zimmerman. Christine is an anti-diet dietitian along with an intuitive eating counselor. And her and I unpack and revisit a ton of really dynamic and nuanced topics. This is one that I really encourage you guys to listen to start to finish. I'll highlight a few of the things that we talk about, but really there's a lot of detail in here. Christine is such an amazing presence and has so much expertise as well as just insight into how and why we think and feel the way we do about food. And what we end up doing in this episode is really turning on its head so many of the things that we think about food, and so many of the reasons that we feel certain ways about how we eat and why we make decisions around food in the ways that we do. And it really flies in the face of popular culture and how we're marketed to about food. How we talk about food, again, how we feel about food and the pleasure that we get from that. So it's really, really impactful, and for me was an important conversation to just be made aware of so many of these different areas that impact something as fundamental and critical as how we fuel our bodies. So few of the areas that we touch on, again, just to highlight, we talk about the psychology versus the science of weight loss, and really how we focus so much as a culture and a society on the science, but have turned a blind eye to the psychology. And that really is where we're going to find so many of the answers and so many of the reasons that these systems are broken for so many individuals. We talk about the perils of weight cycling, how inherently dieting and restrictive eating are going to set us up for failure eventually, and how this is going to lead to a perpetual series of weight cycling that so many of us have dealt with and we see as such a pervasive component of eating culture globally. We talk about stigmas around eating and how certain foods and certain things that we have identified as bad or good can be so paralyzing. And that stigma is really what gets in the way of having a healthy relationship with food and really enjoying fueling our bodies. Eating as a part of self-care. How we eat, how we feel about fueling our bodies, the enjoyment that the experience of eating gives us is really something that we should see as self-care. And it's such an important part of feeling balanced and feeling satisfied. And so for me, this was a really impactful component of the conversation. Getting pleasure from food, this is something that is good, right? There's nothing wrong with food being a pleasure center and being an area in our lives where we derive pleasure. So we don't have to rush through our food experiences. We don't have to feel bad about taking time to prepare meals and to fuel our bodies in a way that allows us to feel satisfied. And again, there's pleasure associated with that, and that's a good thing. So again, lots and lots of nuance. Each one of these topics we expand on. This spurs different types of questions that both Christine and I unpack and dive into. So again, I encourage you to sit down with a cup of coffee and listen to this one from start to finish. Really, really impactful. And again, Christine is just such a powerhouse when it comes to how she guides people in their journey with food. And again, this is something that is such a, it feels almost ridiculous to say, but it's such an important part of our lives, but yet it's something that we downplay, or that we feel guilty about, or that we're not quite sure how to navigate, or we're not sure how we should feel about food. And Christine just has such a amazing perspective and her ability to guide individuals through these feelings and these emotions, and ultimately deliver tactical advice on how they can live better lives is something that I've watched unfold in her capacity as the dietitian for TEC, and it's something that has really been transformative in my life. And so there's, I'm sure that whoever, wherever you're coming from, and whatever experiences you've had with food, I'm sure that you'll get something out of this conversation. So next, as a reminder, for those of you looking for resources related to the things that we talk about in Endurance Minded, again, these are things around goal setting, enjoying the process, being able to reach your goals, finding balance and joy in that process. So many of the topics that we talk about and we look at, often through the lens of athleticism, as you well know, if you're a listener, a recurring listener in this podcast, so many of these topics can be and even should be applied to all areas of our lives, right? The way that we look at reaching our full potential through a dedicated movement practice, those same tools and that same mindset applies to how we accomplish our goals in all areas of our lives. So with this in mind, we are, myself along with Christine Hernandez, who is the mental performance coach for TEC, are going to be hosting a workshop December 28th at 8 o'clock in the morning Mountain Standard Time. It's going to be a virtual 90-minute workshop that's going to help you understand how you can set goals that are in alignment with the life you want to live and the impact that you want to have in the world. So the name of the workshop is Accelerate Your Impact, and we designed this for individuals who are looking for ways to really create their most impactful year yet. So often the story that I hear is, I didn't accomplish my goals, or I didn't enjoy the process in accomplishing those goals, or I'm not moving through my day in a way that feels fulfilling, or it's not bringing me joy, or whatever that narrative is. It gets recycled so often. So Christine and I teamed up, and we created this workshop to get at exactly this pain point. So if you're looking for a way to really sink your teeth into a lot of the concepts that we talk about in Endurance Minded, this is the resource for you. And so I'll put the link in the show notes. You can also send us a note at enduranceminded.com. I'm happy to send you the information. You can, any way that you want to reach out to us. I want to get this in as many people's hands as possible, because I think this is something that's really, really going to be impactful for so many people. It's going to help you get a very, very clear vision of what it's going to look like to set goals that are in alignment with the life that you want to lead. And that's where the disconnect is for so many people. So we created a resource to allow our listeners in the broader community to really, again, put so many of these things that we talk about on the podcast into action in their own lives. So we want this to be something that is approachable for everyone, as well as tactical. So you're going to leave with the tools and relationships that you need to put these things into play in your own life as soon as you leave the workshop. So again, that's December 28th, 8 in the morning, Mountain Standard Time. Accelerate Your Impact. Look for the link to sign up in the show notes of this episode, or send us a note at enduranceminded.com. And I would love for anyone to attend. It's something that I think is really going to be a really valuable tool and a well-timed resource, given that we're coming to the end of the year. So, as always, thank you so much. Please enjoy my conversation with Christine Zimmerman. Hey everyone, before we dive into this episode, I want to take a moment to tell you about InsideTracker. As I've talked about at length on the show, my passion is helping individuals discover the tools, resources, and relationships they need to reach their full potential. It's about more than just getting fit or being in shape for one race. It's about realizing the value in the lifetime pursuit of dedicating yourself to become the best version of you that you can be. So no matter what you love, whether it's running, riding your bike, racing, or just getting out and enjoy the great outdoors, you want to do it forever. That's where InsideTracker can help. As a lifelong athlete who's done everything under the sun, I've gotten blood work done many times over the years, and it's always provided critical information. Even when I was feeling great and training hard, my blood work uncovered critical deficits such as low vitamin D and elevated iron. Despite how your training is going or how you're feeling, InsideTracker helps to uncover specific, individual, and actionable insights that allow you to not only perform better, but feel better and be healthier. InsideTracker was founded in 2009 by leading scientists in aging, genetics, and biometrics. Using their patented algorithm, InsideTracker analyzes your body's data to provide you with a clear picture of what's going on inside of you and to offer you science-backed recommendations for positive diet and lifestyle changes. Then, InsideTracker tracks your progress every day, every step of the way towards reaching your performance goals and living a longer, healthier life. So, endurance-minded listeners can get 25% off the entire InsideTracker store. Just visit info.insidetracker.com/endurance-minded to take advantage of 25% off of the entire InsideTracker store. Being an athlete is about more than just completing the right workouts. So visit info.insidetracker.com/endurance-minded today to start taking a proactive approach to understanding what your body needs to perform better and live longer. So, any number of directions we can go, but one of the places that I'd like to maybe start is the I think the very real fact that so many folks, athletes and maybe even folks that don't necessarily identify as athletes or see themselves as athletes, so many people use exercise as a way to earn their meals, to earn their calories, right? We've heard this idea, this narrative, this construct before is, I'm going to have to do X number of push-ups or run X number of miles or ride X number of hours to earn this, insert food here, right? These foods that we deem, quote unquote bad, or we have some sort of relationship with these particular foods where we feel like we feel guilty for eating them. So, I'd love to just get, with your expertise and experience in the space and intuitive eating and guiding people's relationships with food, where where does that come from, and how do we navigate, how do we change that relationship? How do we fix that construct?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent topic. Kind of like using food as reward. And it's interesting to think about like where that comes from. And I think sometimes I hear clients talk about that was the model even in their childhood. Like, and I see it in schools too, right? Like teachers will be like, here's your Skittles or M&Ms, or, even maybe earlier, like, oh, if you go poopy on the potty, then you get an M&M.
Right.
So it's so like in our culture to have to like wait for the reward. And I think I do see a lot of athletes kind of create that same system for themselves. And it's, nothing is black and white, but I feel like for many people, it can get so slippery with restriction, right? That whenever, you don't allow yourself something, and then it has like more power, and like I don't ever let myself, I'm not going to give myself this unless I do that. It can get more extreme, and then once you get it right after being restricted, the pendulum swings to binge, right? When you get it, then you really get it and you go crazy. And that I think is the real issue with that hmm, kind of reward. It can, I think it sometimes can go that way. Um, what is your thought with that? What are your ideas?
Yeah, I think having spent most of my career and certainly my adult life, in the endurance sports space and heavily involved in athletics and it's it's something that I mean for a very long time and truthfully I think since until you and I you know started to talk and I better understood um, what it looks and feels like and what it looks like in practice to really you know kind of take a more gentle and graceful approach to how we eat and how we view food. It was just something I just took for granted. I never struggled with it personally, but it
Mhm,
was a narrative that I had always heard. Right? I mean,
mhm,
you joked about it with people I used to train with and race with. It was yeah, you're gonna have to earn this and that, or you better get to it because you're gonna go out for pizza tonight, or I mean, it was just like this kind of ongoing thing that we tossed around, and I didn't um I didn't realize how negative that actually plays out in so many people's lives, right? It's just this like constant
mhm,
broken
mhm,
system. Um, and it's this, like you said, it's this kind of boom and bust, right? Or,
mhm,
binge and back and forth. So, yeah, I think only again in the last, several years, since I was lucky enough to meet you, have I really gained a better understanding of how negative that, even like joking about it, because it's so
mhm.
pervasive in the athletic community. Um, yeah, yeah, it's a really can be a very hurtful thing, and I realize now how many people really struggle with that, kind of behind the scenes, so to speak.
And I think you just made a great connection, Taylor. Not giving our like, kinda holding off for rewards is a type of restriction, and restriction is a type of dieting, and dieting is a horrible part of our culture, and the thing most predictive of restriction and dieting is weight gain, and I can't say that more clear. Like, we have such a mass amount of evidence that shows the people that are restricted from foods, the people that, you know, weren't allowed to have enough when they were hungry are the ones that certainly carry the most excess body weight, struggle with their sense of self, and have had the most like weight cycling, which is another thing. Diet culture doesn't tell us, right? That, oh, yeah, we can take off the weight, but you're going to gain it back and more. And I tell people of every size, like, that's the problem. There's no sustainable, safe way that we know of to shrink your body. And when we start down that slide, it can be a real burden because people come to me and they're like, God, I wish I was the weight I was when I first thought I started needed to lose weight. Like, because every year it tends to get a little bit more because your body is smarter than your mind, right? Um, our body just knows restriction, which is like famine, famine, and I will, save up for a rainy day. I got to put those fat cells even deeper into muscle tissue, even deeper into organs. Like your fat can get into your liver, into your pancreas. So we can't really outsmart it. One of the things I try to get people to do is like really find a purpose in their eating, like to nourish yourself so that your body doesn't have to go into this zone of, I better hold on to every calorie this person puts in their mouth so that I don't ever have to worry about being in a famine again. And that's something that a lot of people, even athletes struggle with is nourishing especially like before workouts. Sometimes you were talking about using food as a reward for athletes, like after I complete this, then I'm going to allow myself that. Sometimes it's that same person that's not actually fueling a workout, right? Like you see a lot of people going into workouts fasted, and then being like, okay, after I do all this, then I'm going to give myself something to eat. And we know now the science, sports science is saying, oh my gosh, a fasted workout, like you're honestly better off not doing the workout because your body is breaking down all that lean tissue in order to get energy to do the workout. So I think you've talked about it too, like really looking at food as fuel and how to look at that the pre, during, and after, and really nourishing your body in that whole sense. And then yeah, I'm all for like food as nourishment and food as pleasure, and and you can reward yourself with food, but it will probably feel more um in the right place and less like a binge if you're actually like fueled and nourished through the whole experience, right? Like we've all been in that place of, oh my god, I didn't have enough to eat, or I didn't feel myself well, and then like once you had food, it was like out of control eating, and that doesn't feel good either, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it takes my my mind in a few different directions, but I wonder, with that in mind, I mean, what's the right way to talk about weight loss? You know,
Mm.
if
Mhm.
if I don't know, like, because it comes up,
Mhm.
right? Like, let's just
Yeah. Right.
acknowledge
Right.
somebody says, "Man, I feel like I would perform better if I
Mhm.
was a little lighter or a little leaner. That would make me a
Mhm.
little more. That would make me feel faster or more athletic
Mhm.
or whatever." And I'm not. So how do we talk
Mhm.
about that?
Yeah.
How do we approach those goals in a way that
Mhm.
is appropriate?
Right. That's a great question. And I think the first place to start is just like honoring that person in that state of feeling. And like a person feeling like this is not the body size that I want to be in. Like that's a struggle. That's a hard place to be in. Or even through COVID, like so many people really had a real big change in their body size. And that was, a tough place. But at least we had our food, right? um, and so just acknowledging, like, it sounds like you get to have that feeling. You get to believe that this is not where you want to be. Um, but and then offering like what are some of the strategies that you've seen in yourself, and tell me about like how they've worked for you. Like I just had a client today, like the keto diet, tried it for 3 years, and you can lose weight. And it feels like success. And then, hearing more about the story, oh, well, it only lasts so long. And then I need to eat carbohydrate because for most athletes, they'll find out the keto diet works great in zone one, but as soon as you need to get some power, there's really nothing there for you. And so, just recounting like what has the journey that you've taken, like all the dieting and how it's affected you physiologically, psychologically, socially, and all that really matters because that's like many of the key areas of your life. And I think that's the process that I like to take people with, but also looking at how can we look at your body not in something you have to like do to it, but how can you open up that space for change in the process, but not the goal. Kind of like our culture looks at happiness like a goal instead of like a process, right? That the science says if you try to attain happiness as a goal, honestly, you get like, it's like the recipe for misery. And it's the same thing for weight loss. If you look at weight loss as your goal, honestly, the most predictive thing is weight gain. So I tell people, what could you do? What kind of behaviors, what kind of processes could we look at in your life that might create that space for that change? And that's really the difference between, I think, a lot of what diet culture does versus what like intuitive eating therapy does, and the difference.
I love the analogy of the like chasing happiness.
Mm,
I agree, and it's something that I've talked about, on this podcast and other places. Is you there's this very real need to work to find joy in that process. That happiness is not, I've heard the adage, it's like, the happiness is not 10 yards down the field, right? Like this, because it's a moving goalpost, right?
mm, mhm,
There's an author that I really like. His name's Brad Stulberg, who wrote a book, and he coined the phrase heroic individualism, which
mm,
is this idea that you're always chasing something, right? You're
mm,
never actually getting there, and that makes me think about this, whether it's happiness or this kind of quote unquote perfect body type that you want, or what. Like, you're never, you can't be, um, you can't fill that void, right? You're
mm.
always pushing further downfield,
Yeah.
um, and that's a really that's a tough place to live. Like when
Mhm,
when it's never obtainable.
mhm. Right.
Um, so back to weight loss though, because
Mhm.
I just think there's so much to
Yeah.
unpack there. But when so a lot of people lead, and you see this all over the place. It is like, um, you have to be in a caloric deficit to lose weight, and
Mm,
and there's all these people. Well, so yeah, that's what I'm saying. I want to get your
mhm.
opinion. Like, these are the tropes, right? Like, this, you see
Yeah.
this like posted everywhere. It's like,
Mm,
fact, right? Like,
mhm,
whatever this marketing slogan is. Um, and so, intentional calorie restriction for weight loss is a very slippery slope.
mhm.
Um, how how do we address that?
Yeah.
What is the way? Again, just to piggyback on this kind of these concepts of weight loss
Mhm,
and identifying where that person's at, and maybe there is another, you know,
mhm,
goal that they have. Like, so how do we get them there in a way that is healthy and sustainable? Since we've
mhm,
identified that, like, dieting and some of these things that were
mhm.
marketed, they're not. We know scientifically they're not
Right.
sustainable. So yeah,
Yeah.
what's your experience there?
I think there's like 2 categories to look at. Like, one is like the psychology of it, trying to shrink your body. There's a lot of psychology with that, and then the science. Um, and so kind of addressing both pieces. Sometimes people are like, "Just give me the science." I'm like, "Oh,
Right,
you
right, right.
probably need the psychology the most." Mm, um, I mean, and the psychology has been thrown under the bus, right? That our culture is, again, so so glaringly attracted to the science of it, and we haven't honored people and their experiences because we've given so much science. And so addressing the psychology of things like, what is your inner voice? And, many times it's the internalized weight stigma that people have for themselves, like, wow, they really are unhappy in their own bodies and they really don't like themselves. And sometimes that pain is what leads to really disordered eating behaviors, right? I get calls um, on the phone just yesterday. Help me! I just ate 2 pounds of M&Ms. And when you break it down, like, this person is really, they feel horrible, and they're just like using food as like weaponizing food on their bodies. And so the psychology, I feel like, is like one of the most important pieces. And then turning also, there's the science of it too. And again, there's a lot of myths that we have to bust in that area, which you just brought up, like, oh, you have to be in calorie deficit. Wow, like once clients really start like nourishing themselves with like consistent real meals, some of the new science says athletes that are a little bit of science here, like splitting meals, right? They're showing like actually taking a meal, splitting it into throughout the day, fueling consistently, not in calorie deficit. These people are like, we're doing samples, their muscles, they're having um, more lean muscle synthesis, they're having less adipose go in their muscles. So, there are strategies. I think looking at the how of eating is really important instead of just focusing on the what. Sometimes I have clients reorder the way they're eating to reduce, glucose curves, putting protein, fiber, fat before the carbohydrate. So there's just the how of eating, I think, is really a new science in how to maintain or attain kind of a fitness level with your body. And notice I didn't talk about like shrinking your body, but again, just like happiness, a lot of people are finding like, hey, I feel really good in this body that has a really high BMI, but I'm feeling really fit and I feel like healthy and I'm real super strong. And I'm like, good for you. Like, there's no reason you have to, try to attain this healthcare standard BMI to be a fit person, because every time fitness over any fatness is really true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess my thought on that is just the two camps of like, science is important, but the psychology of why someone wants to lose weight, and going back, looking at like why they got to that place, like, and figuring out, what their journey is with their body, I think is super important.
I can't tell you, I'm sure you've had the same experience. Like, I can't tell you how many countless amazing athletes and fit individuals I have met and known who, from a BMI perspective, are morbidly obese. Like
Mhm.
it's such a crappy measure of a person's, fitness or ability
Mhm.
or how their body, what their body is capable of. Like
Mhm.
I that's I hopefully
Mhm.
we're starting to get away from that. I know, as like a measure of a person's health. We're starting to see
Mhm.
some varied metrics, but hopefully
Mhm.
that'll go away. Um, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Hopefully, it will go away. Like, we used to think that smoking was glamorous, and now we know it's gross. I mean, there's so many. We used to think that marriage was just between a man and a woman, and now we know love is like in different phases and places and people, and so norms change, and we have to really continue this dialogue, because of weight stigma and discrimination, and body size is, it's still like the like last bastion of like open discrimination, and we just have to really push into this. And I want to make another comment, like that I know that many physicians that take insurance are required in order to bill insurance. Many primary healthcare providers are required to bring up BMI in the conversation, even though they don't want to.
Mm,
And so it puts the healthcare provider in this weird place, because like they have 15 minutes and now they're just like, oh, by the way, your BMI is this, and then it creates this shame scenario. But I want to let anybody that's listening to this podcast know your physician may not even want to talk about it, and you are welcome, A, not to get weighed, and B, decide that you don't want to have that conversation and just politely say, I really don't want to have this conversation about BMI today. Say, I have a anti-diet dietitian, or I have a coach that is supporting me in my journey with my health. And literally you can just bypass the conversation. So please don't feel pressured to have a conversation about your BMI. It can be really triggering.
I know so many people that have that feel worse about themselves when they come back from the doctor, to your point, right? Like, and not to like trash doctors. Again, they might have to do that, or there's pressure from other places, or they legally or whatever. But I've talked to athletes. They're like, man, I felt really good about myself until I went and had this checkup. And and not that they're unhealthy, but it like you said, it highlights these areas, or makes them feel less confident. And then we work to kind of reposition that, and understand where that's coming from and so on. But yeah, I it's an unfortunate maybe reality currently, or truth, that sometimes those
Mm-hmm.
checkups, like, even though you're healthy, like, you leave feeling like you're
Mm-hmm.
not as healthy. um yeah, I do want to go back. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
psychology versus the science, it really struck me. Like, there's so many parallels there with with athletics or endurance sports. And to your point about, like, we really struggle to tap into the psychology piece, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's really, like, that's why this podcast exists. Is like,
Yeah.
we want, there's science, right? If we're talking about like
Mm-hmm.
performance, we always go to, what's the workout, what's my power, pace, what's right. There's quantitative components, and those can be important, but we so rarely give time and space and weight to the psychology piece, to the mental emotional
Mm-hmm.
aspects of what's actually required to do those things, to show
Mm-hmm.
up, to stay consistent, whatever. um and it's the same thing. I just saw so many parallels when you said, like, that's the same thing with dieting and weight loss and so on. I mean, what is it in your experience that's made it challenging for people to I don't know, own up to, or like, just give weight and credence to the psychological components? Like, why is the science, and
Mm-hmm.
like, you're as much in the science as anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that we're not using it, but,
Mm-hmm.
like, why do we shy away from the other part of the equation?
From the psychology part.
Yeah, like, what's it? Because I see it in the sport, like on the endurance, like
Mhm.
on the, again, like on the athlete side, or whatever, however you want to like
Mhm.
position that.
Mhm.
So it's a pervasive thing, right? Like, I'm getting it as a coach, like, you're getting it as the dietitian. So that individual is like, you know, we're selling, so to speak, this very, like,
Mhm.
singular kind of brand of individual, right? When it's so much more nuanced than that. Like, I feel like
Mhm.
that's where the psychology's at. So yeah, I don't know. Like,
Right.
why does that piece get lost?
I think the loss is really summed up in one word, and it's stigma. I think stigma is so paralyzing. And, we live in such a culture of like, you should just be able to wash your face and do it. Come on, just get out there, get your shoes on, and just go. And there's a lot of people who they feel a lot of shame. They feel a lot of shame from stigma. And we know now that a lot of, going back to the original part of this conversation, that when we look at like where people kind of go sideways in eating, it's usually from stigma, whether it's internalized weight stigma, just perceived stigma, that there's a lot of people that don't feel like they're good enough, that they can do this. And that's why I love, your TEC has just such the right um, view of this. And like, hey, everybody's welcome. Everybody's part of this. You're an athlete, and that's so key. Um, because there's a lot of people that just don't feel like they can do it. And that's the thing. That's the circular conversation. That's, feeling that shame, which creates depression and then creates the scenario where I think I'll just sit on the couch and eat another sleeve of, Oreos. And it just kind of keeps driving that thing until people say, hey, wait, we can start here. There's a start line for you too. And so that invitation is really powerful. And I'm so thankful that you and your coaches really agree and will work with people at every level. And so I think that's the strategic piece that's in place to help people where they are and to kind of get them moving in whatever direction they want to go. And again, like not focusing on the end result of their body weight, but focusing in on the rest of the journey can be really powerful. And just letting that part kind of naturally kind of evolve. And it does. People are like, wow, I'm feeling better. And because I'm feeling better and moving, I'm making better choices for myself. And just launching from that space can be super powerful.
So many people feel like they have to, to piggyback on your point of this kind of like hard charging, hard drag. We get so much of that, and um, and it works for some people, but I'm always quick to say is like, you don't have to get up at 4 a.m,
Mm.
right? Like you don't, it
Hmm.
doesn't, there is a space for, for progress and for you to strive to be the best version of yourself in whatever that looks like, and also for some grace, right? Like you don't
Hmm.
have to kill yourself every day, right? And I think that holds a lot of people back from
Hmm.
having conversations about their body, with you, um, and then having conversations about a consistent movement practice
Hmm.
with people like me. Is they're like, well, it feels like it's so far away, right? They're like,
Hmm.
well, this is what it must take to be quote unquote successful and to reach my goals, and I don't feel like I can do that, or I'm not there yet, or whatever, so I just don't do it, and
Hmm.
to your point, and I want to make it very clear that like that that opportunity is open to everyone, right? Like
Hmm.
you can engage with these things starting wherever you're at and move
Hmm.
forward in a way that's healthy and sustainable. But it doesn't have to be this like, you know, this hard charging at all costs, like forget
Hmm.
your feelings kind of thing, right? Like I think
Hmm.
we have to honor like what it actually looks and feels like to show up day to day, and
Hmm.
it's hard, right? Like
Hmm.
it's hard and it's messy and it's,
Hmm.
life, there's days that suck, and um
Yeah.
that's okay.
And being okay in the ambivalence. And I love that place. It's like, yeah, what do I feel like today? And I feel like it's really important. We're kind of talking. I feel like we're talking about kind of a newer athlete or person that's just kind of early stages of change, right? Pre-contemplation. But even for like some of our listeners that might be like the on the other end, like pro athletes, high end people, that's an issue too. Like just looking at where can the pendulum kind of swing a little bit more in the medium middle. Yes, when you're training and you're doing many hours of training and very consistent eating and very planned out nutrition, but staying in that place for too long is disordered. And
Mm.
like, how can you kind of come back to where can your pendulum come back to? Maybe it will go in that area occasionally, but really having a coach and a dietitian to kind of help you with periodization, trying to find where you can the pendulum can swing back a little bit is really helpful. And I think another part of that being helpful is just so you can identify with like humanity, because being so extreme, um, it can be a lonely place also. And again, in that very extreme restrictive place, right? What happens after the really super extreme athletes stay there too long? Some of them, they never want to go back on the bike.
Right.
They never want to eat like that again. And so really helping a lot of people find that middle way where they feel like they can be supportive, that they can sustain, they can make some gains, but not get extreme. I think is really key.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I mean, what do we see as soon as every pro athlete or Olympian or whatever, is done or, has is in the off season is like, they're sitting by a pool deck hanging out, like not measuring their food, right? Like it's not sustainable. Like no one does that year round and no one
Mhm,
does it year after year. And
mhm,
then when those people are out of their sport, like they're they're quickly working to find some more balanced approach to engage in
mm, mhm,
athleticism and how they fuel their bodies. And, like to
mm,
your point, like no one,
mhm,
the pendulum needs to eventually find itself in the middle, and,
mm, mhm,
um, yeah, I mean, I, I struggled with that for a long time. When I was,
mm,
um, I just thought you always had to be doing more,
mm,
and that was the
mhm,
only way that you could really measure progress was to year after year do more, and whether it was go faster or longer or both or whatever. And that manifested itself in many different ways. But the like when I was able to find a more balanced approach, where I actually found a lot of joy in the process, it became like the most productive and happy, in terms of my athletic self that I've ever been. And
mm,
finally, to your point, like when the pendulum, when I
mhm,
let it go, when I finally was like, you know what, like
mhm,
I need to find the middle path.
mhm,
Um, it it really, I was like, oh, this feels so much more rewarding. Like
mm,
truthfully, I wasn't finding a
mm.
lot of joy in like constantly
Yeah,
destroying myself. Um,
right.
so yeah, no, that resonates a lot, for
Mhm,
sure. That's when you
right.
feel like that's where you find your value, is
Mm,
always being like at the extreme
mhm,
limits of things.
right.
Um, yeah, no, that's super interesting.
Because,
Um,
like, then you don't the bite, like, having to exercise just, like, feels torturous, and it comes down to, like, pleasure and satisfaction, and I say not just in the food, but, like, when you're moving your body, of course, high-end training, yeah, if you're doing intervals, like, zone 5, just huge VO2 max, FTP stuff, it doesn't feel like there's not much pleasure and satisfaction, and I understand that, but how do we sprinkle in some workouts where you do have that attunement, that introspection of, I'm feeling my body and I'm having fun, right? Like connecting with that, I think is so key for our athletes, and I do that with food too. Like, hey, what sounds like fun to you to eat? And people are like, fun? I'd never eat for fun.
mm,
Like, oh man, we gotta
yeah.
we gotta switch things up here.
How does somebody, like, how do you recommend someone do that? Yeah, because yeah, I think
Mm,
that language, I would imagine, is not how most people would think about food.
mm.
I am I get immense joy out of food. Like you and I have talked about this. I've actually talked about on the podcast. Like I it's a passion of mine. So I see that, but like only because it's like, something that I'm very
Mhm,
uh passionate about. But how, yeah, like what form does that take on? How do we do that in
mm,
a way that's still healthy or sustainable,
Mhm.
or I don't know. There feels
Mhm.
like there's a an opportunity for maybe some like lost in translation, right? People are like
Mhm.
fun, and it's like
Mhm.
they go again. It's that like binge, right? They
Mhm.
go nuts.
Mm, mhm.
So how do we do that? How do we have fun and still stay
Very fun, yeah.
healthy or whatever?
Right. And yeah, this where is where it can it kind of it's just kind of person by person, but and it depends on the level of restriction. And you may remember too, like your days of really high end training, and if you were really restrictive and then kind of coming out of that, like how that was, right? So the pendulum can really like whew, all of a sudden it's like, you know, pancakes every morning for breakfast with lots of syrup because you didn't have that and it like tasted so good. And so some of it is, I tell people for the years of restriction that you had, it may be you almost need that much time with permission. And permission is really a key concept. It's not always saying yes. It's not always it's like you have permission to say yes and to say no. But if you said no to yourself so many times, if you were like such a food police person, to say yes, it may feel so good that there may be like some pendulum eating where you're like, wow, I just ate too much. And just helping people go through that experience and saying, this is normalized. Like, I want to normalize your experience, that you restricted yourself and now you're allowing yourself some food and it tastes amazing and you're probably overeating too. And that's okay because if you we're going to think about the pendulum, and the pendulum eventually will calm down, but you may go through kind of this phase of like food is so fun right now. Did you have anything like that when you came out of your pro years of like, and then like some people like went from like I didn't drink any alcohol to, then I really started putting that more in my life, and then that pendulum kind of came back a little bit, or food.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think certainly in moments. I mean, um, I've always really liked food,
Mhm.
meaning that like it's a really important part of um, just like how I move through my life. So I
Mhm.
honestly was never willing to like not enjoy food. Not
Mm,
that I
mhm.
wasn't conscious of where,
Yeah.
and I still am like,
Mhm.
food quality, food
Mhm.
sources, food,
Yeah.
I want it to fuel my body and my
Mhm.
endeavors.
Mhm.
But with that in mind, like
Mhm.
I was never, I never took it as far as some of the people that I raced with did,
Mhm.
in terms of like
Yeah.
really being like, no, I'm not like I. Can't have this, or I can't.
Mhm. Yeah.
That
Good for
being
you.
said, I mean, certainly there were moments, where like I was training really hard. I was racing bikes, so being lean
Mhm.
was something that I was after, right? Like that was faster, that was power to weight, and
Mhm.
I so I mean, when I would be done with like big training blocks or the season, I mean, there's certainly moments where like I ate like 2 pizzas by myself and stuff like that, where
Mhm.
it's just like
Yeah.
to your point, like I was certainly conscious of it in
Mhm.
terms of like I didn't want to gain weight. Um, I wanted to, you know, wanted the food to come from places that I knew were going to be
Mhm.
essentially readily available for fuel.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, there were glimpses of it. I certainly had
Mhm.
times when I felt that way. It was like, and it wasn't forever, but it would be, a day or two, or like go on vacation or something. And,
Mhm.
you know, honestly, I probably had more of that with, I felt very similar in terms of like movement, right? Like
Mhm.
where I would like would go on vacation and just be like, ugh, like I don't want to do anything, you know?
Mm.
And whereas like
Mhm.
now I so enjoy exercising on vacation. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's one of my favorite ways to, like, experience a place, right?
Yeah.
And that could be as simple as a long
Mm-hmm.
walk or a run or
Mm-hmm.
rent a bike or, simple strength
Mm-hmm.
training. Like, I just love daily movement.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, no, like that pendulum piece kind of swung in that direction with exercise as well, which really informed, honestly, how I think about, like, the athlete experience. It's like
Mm-hmm.
there has to be sustainability. Like you mentioned it
Mm-hmm.
earlier, is like you if you go full gas, and yeah, maybe you, like, reach your outcome based goals, you get, but if at the end of that thing you don't want to look at your running shoes or your bike or your right, then, like, I feel like that's really, in my mind, that's kind of the worst outcome, because I
Mm-hmm.
think it really is incumbent upon me as a coach to give an athlete or help an athlete develop tools and skills to build a lifelong appreciation for movement, right? And that could be
Mm-hmm.
anything. Like, I don't care what you're doing. It's the intrinsic value of that thing that I want to help others
Mm-hmm.
see the value in. So, um, yeah, I don't. It's there's been so much evolution for me over the years in
Mm-hmm.
those spaces, both the eating side of things, um, again, as and then you know the exercise training
Mm-hmm.
side of things as well. Um, yeah, I don't know. How do
One
you? Oh, go ahead.
You were talking about fun with food, and I just thought of another thing I wanted to bring into the conversation that I'd be happy to offer to clients, is like food meditations too. Like I have a chocolate meditation for clients that like have not allowed themselves to have certain foods and are kind of like concerned and worried about ever eating them again. Sometimes just reintroducing that and looking at all the senses that are involved in eating it and really staying connected to the experience, because sometimes when we eat a food that we deem as bad, is scary. And even though we want it, we don't want it, right? Like, we're kind of weird about it. And so just really trying to normalize that experience and teaching people to like have pleasure again with the foods that they used to enjoy is something I really enjoy doing also, um, because people sometimes like disconnect while eating, right? You've probably seen that too, where people are like, oh my God, where's the other half of my sandwich? Or I didn't realize I ate all that, like, because we're so distracted with our eating. But sometimes we create that distraction because we don't, again, it's like another way we weaponize. We don't want to know that we're actually doing this because we don't want to be eating, because we want to be like unconsciously trying to lose weight. And teaching people strategies, whether it's like being purposeful, using introspective awareness for like how they're feeling while they eat, all the sensations of eating, the sensory sensations, and things like the like sensate specific satiety. Like when you start noticing that a food like stops tasting really good, right? Like that's our bodies are kind of made to have a shut off valve. But many times we kind of just blow past that because, well, that piece of cheesecake was $10, so I'm going to finish it.
Mm.
But 5, 10 bites into it, we were like, it didn't taste as good, and that's like your body telling you, like, slow down. But teaching people some of these strategies of like you'll ride the wave like with any pleasure, but then it eventually like crashes, right? Like pleasure only lasts so long, and then we're grasping. And it's that space of grasping that usually is where people tend to overeat, and which may also be putting them in a body size that may not match what feels natural for people. And so that's sometimes a space that I like to help people into is looking at finding the pleasure with food and then figuring out when to stop and start.
Hmm. I mean, it strikes me that, so much of our food system is it really is designed
Yeah.
to take the pleasure away, right? It's like fast and it's it's all these things, right? Like insert
Mhm.
buzzword.
Mhm.
Um and like with like yeah, like I don't know, that's is it um like is it a convenience thing? Like why is it bad? Why has it gotten bad to like enjoy your food, right? Like I feel like that's kind of people get
Mm.
like
Mhm.
they're ashamed of it a lot of times, right? Like they're like, oh, I just
Mhm.
if it's like faster and quicker and more
Mhm.
whatever, and like
Mhm.
they don't take a long time to eat, right? Like oh, it's just something quick, like 10 minutes, but I'll get
Mhm.
like back to this other thing. Like it's almost like an inconvenience to eat.
Mhm.
Um, like yeah, like I mean I don't know. I mean I guess am I am I making that up or is that something that you see in the work that you do? Like that there's
Right, it's a
a
lack of self-care, I think, that people
right.
don't value take the time to, food your eating is part of your self-care,
Mm,
and I mentioned that to a client this week, and she's like, "I didn't really consider that." But eating is part of self-care and taking the time, to eat, but the self-care piece is not just about the science of nutrition, like, not all the vitamins, minerals, carbs, macronutrients. It's about, also the psychology, the pleasure, the satisfaction, and, are these different foods do they have the qualities that are gonna satisfy you in texture, like crunchy, smooth, creamy, all that, chewy, um, really taking a look at those things too, are super important. I'm laughing because I was on the airplane and there was this retreat center somewhere in California for like $1,800 a day that you would just drink juice. Okay. I was like, "Oh my god," that you would and, like, tout, like, it's a detox system. All I can say about things like that, okay, the reason it's only 3 days is because you're gonna be so hungry.
right,
Maybe you're gonna
right,
lose weight, but you're gonna, binge on Chick-fil-A on the way home, right?
right.
It's just crazy. So, just please don't know that it your brain is so complex. You need like a variety of all those things to really satisfy. And please take the time to satisfy yourself in with just a lot of variety with nutrients and also with textures and even like cultural foods, like satisfying yourself with what's meaningful for your culture.
Mm, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, my
Mhm.
favorite way, like the reason I travel, and I think it's kind of gets at what you're saying, but like the reason I travel is to like experience a culture through food. Like I think that's such
Mm.
an impactful way to like have that experience.
Mhm.
Um, but before I forget, so how do we? You mentioned detox, which
Mhm.
I don't do them.
Please don't.
I don't. I don't. Stuff like that. It feels a little flash in the pan for me. But
Mhm.
like how do we? People do them all the time, right? Like it's a heavily marketed. There's all these different.
Mhm.
Pick a thing. Um, what I mean, why do people do? How do you handle them? Someone comes to you and they're like, I want to do a detox. What does that
Mhm.
really like? What are they trying to get at? How do we take
Mhm.
that and
Mhm.
reroute it in a
Mhm.
way that's healthy?
Yeah. Right, and first normalizing, curiosity, like, humans are curious, and we're just curious, like, is this really gonna is there something impure about my body? Like, why do you feel like you need a detox? And most people would say, "Oh, I feel overweight," or, "I feel like I'm a little puffy," or something, or, "I feel like I just haven't eaten well, and I've got a lot of yuck in my body." And all that is just really bad science because your liver is an amazing organ, and your body, your kidneys are just cleaning you 24/7. And if you're eating regularly and you otherwise healthy person, eliminating in the right ways you should, you don't need any detoxes. But kind of finding out like what makes you want that. What and then going back to, this is another diet, and do diets work, and what is the destruction from dieting? And it's, that's a really long conversation, the destruction of dieting. So yeah, detox diets, again, another problem.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what's the one, the lemon, cayenne, pepper? We don't we can skip that and then just have a real meal, right?
Yeah, for sure. Just have a
Good.
real meal. Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody's always the what gets touted is people do them and then they like they without getting too like graphic, people are always, oh, there's always like toxins being released from my body,
Mm.
like in their urine and their bowel movements, and like what I guess like just for my own curiosity, like what's happening when somebody
Mm.
does a detox? Like what does
Mhm.
your body, you know, why does
Yeah.
it? Because it kind of like behaves. I'm not advocating for
Mhm.
detox, but like kind of
Mhm.
behaves like
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
flushing out all these things or
Right.
whatever. Like, so what's happening?
Yeah, so there's different detox, ways to detox. Whether I was talking before, like the, drink only juice for 3 days kind of detox, whether it's a laxative type detox where you're, chemically stimulating your colon to really poop more. And again, your body is strong enough, it can do these things for 3 days. But at the expense, and this is where, athletes, need to worry, at the expense of lean tissue. So your body is really good at, well, if you're not going to eat food, well, you're just going to have to break it down in your body.
Mm,
So, and of course, the laxative part, that's different. But if you're not going to eat food and you're just going to have juice as a to detox, you can be okay because you have enough that you're having carbohydrate, you're having fluid, but you need protein, and your body will just break down lean tissue for that. That's one side. So the other side of detox, where you're actually chemically stimulating your colon to poop more, yeah, so you can get all those out, and you might feel better, maybe a little bit lighter, because not just poop, but you're stimulating your colon, so now fluid, and we all know that fluid is just a short-term amount, that as soon as you drink water again, you're going to gain that weight back. But that laxatives are not a long-term weight loss either. That in the short term, you might see some change because of water loss, um, and fecal mass. But again, you can't keep doing that forever. In fact, if you are using stimulating laxatives, as it's actually a purging type behavior, which is disordered. It's really, it can be really dangerous because you not only lose fluid, but you can lose a lot of potassium that way. And I've seen athletes literally crumple from laxative abuse. So that's again, not a sustainable way to lose weight. And some people try it for a couple of days. That's fine. But again, why even start it if you know it's not going to really be sustainable?
right. Yeah, it's just that kind of quick fix.
Yeah.
We there's so much of that going around, right? It's like the
Mhm.
newest, latest, greatest, and um, yeah. I mean, I think similar to like it's easier to get the quick food than to actually like prepare it and find pleasure and set aside time for doing that.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
um, I think laxative detox is probably a fantastic way to wrap up our conversation.
Okay. Yeah. The end, right?
Yes. No. Thank you so much. No, like
Sure.
your
Mm,
insight. I always learn so much from you, and so
mm,
appreciate and value
yeah.
um, what you do for people, both those that work with TEC and
Mhm.
and elsewhere. So thank you, Christine.
Thank you. Yeah, this is great.